So before I started to keep kosher, my sister was keeping kosher. She was religious before I was. By I think that was when I was a junior or my junior or a senior in high school. My sister started to keep kosher, started to keep Shabbos and everything when she was at the University of Iowa. And her Rebbitzin Simser, who lived in Iowa together with her husband, Rabbi Simser, they would come to visit Milwaukee because I believe her parents lived in Milwaukee. So one of the times that she came to visit Milwaukee, she came by our house. And she looks at me and it was so random. And she was like, "Do you eat cheeseburgers?" I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "A Yid doesn't eat cheeseburgers." And I was like, "Why?" "A Jew doesn't eat cheeseburgers." I was like, "Okay." And that was the whole conversation. There's a whole conversation. And I was just like, I was so thrown back. Like it was like seemingly so random. But there was something that stuck with me like that. For some reason, it stuck with me. Her saying like a Jew doesn't eat cheeseburgers. And something about the strength of her voice and her conviction and her like, this is what it, it represented a lot to me. Like made me think, you know what? Maybe a Jew doesn't eat cheeseburgers. I remember that. That was an interesting thing too. When I was in college and I was starting to really embark on trying to keep kosher. So at the time I was working at a non-kosher restaurant in Madison called the Great Dane. It was a huge place. There was like one, two, three, four, five seating areas, three bars. There was a concert area. It was like huge. I was like a busboy in a bar back there. So I was working in a non-kosher restaurant. I was starting to keep Shabbos, and I was having a hard time making a break from my friends. Like I wanted to keep kosher, but I didn't really know how to go about making like a permanent change. Um, I would do things like I wouldn't cook meat and milk together. I'd have them on the same plate, but I'd kind of separate them. I just I didn't want my, I didn't really want it to be noticed. So it was hard for me. But I was really trying to make a change. And one night, I fell asleep, and all of a sudden, I had this really like, it was a very powerful dream. I was all of a sudden like, I was like in the clouds, and there was a desk that was in the clouds. And all of a sudden, I was sitting across from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was looking at me, and I was like, um, what do you want? So at the time, I went to a Chabad house, but I wasn't, I didn't have much of a connection to the Rebbe in any way, shape, or form at that time. Just in the sense of like more just by going to a Chabad house for Shabbos type of thing. So I asked him, what do you, what am I here to talk to you for? And he said to me, I want to help you start to keep kosher. I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? So he said, just keep in mind that I'm giving you advice that's not permanent, but this advice is going to help you to start to keep kosher permanently. So like it's like an intermediate stage to you starting to keep kosher. I said, okay. And he said, there are three restaurants that you can eat at in Madison. And then in my dream, I was like transported to the different restaurants. So it was like in the place that you work, and then I was there in my dream. You can eat the vegetarian quesadilla. Then he transported me to the sushi restaurant that I used to go with my friends, and he said, "Find out what fish are kosher, and you can have sushi, kosher. You can have the sushi that's made out of kosher fish at this restaurant. And then he took me to one other restaurant, and it was again cheese quesadilla. You can have cheese quesadillas at this restaurant. And then it was back to like talking to him. And he said to me, if you do this, you'll see that it's going to become way easier to start to keep kosher. I woke up and I was kind of shaken up by it a little bit. And I thought to myself, that was interesting. It was spiritual. And I guess I could give that a try because I could still go out to eat with my friends. And instead of eating everything, where, just going out and eating and constantly being confused about what I can have, what I can't have, it was like a concrete, like, movement. So I did it. And if I remember correctly, 3 months later, I was keeping kosher completely. I stopped eating even at the place that I was working at. One of the interesting stories that happened was when I was working at the Great Dane, there was a worker, I think he was Christian from Alaska. His name was Brad. And I ordered a cheese quesadilla. And he was like, how can you eat that? Aren't you Jewish? And I was like, yeah, I'm Jewish. Well, what do you mean? Why wouldn't I be able to eat it? He was like, well, it has refried beans in it. It probably has pork. You're allowed to eat pork? And I was like, no, I don't eat pork. And he was like, okay, let me go check in the kitchen to make sure that these refried beans don't have pork in them. Because in most restaurants, refried beans have pork that are not kosher restaurants. So he goes back and he comes back. He's like, to my surprise, I checked it out. It's actually vegetarian refried beans. And I was kind of like, whoa, it was like a little bit like, that was cool. So the Rambam says in if I remember correctly, I think it's in Mishnah Torah where he talks about like eating like things like insects are really in relationship to non-kosher, that a Jew that's sensitive to non-kosher, he actually finds the non-kosher things kind of disgusting or like an abomination, like ugh, like the soul doesn't really want those things. But obviously, if you become accustomed to it and habituated to it, now this is not, we're not talking about it being actually tasting disgusting. Non kosher food tastes great in general. The Rambam even says, don't say when someone asks you, would you like to eat this piece of pork? The Rambam says, you don't say back to him, oh, that's disgusting. No, you say, it's probably really good. If only I could eat it, but Hashem commands me not to, so I won't. So when we're saying like it's disgusting, it doesn't mean that it's practically on your taste buds disgusting, but there's something spiritual, sensitivity spiritually, that it's like you don't want it. So there was one time that my sister was clearing out her house for Pesach, and I was there, and I was hungry, and I asked her if she had anything for me to eat. She said, I don't know, go take from, she had like a hole in the pantry and such, like all the chametz stick things, all the things with like yeast and such that she was getting rid of before Pesach. So there was some oatmeal there, and I was like, oh, I'll have some oatmeal. Like it wasn't instant oatmeal. It was kind of like the grain, more, no, was it? It was like an instant type of oatmeal. I said, oh, I'll have some of this. I poured myself a bowl. It was kosher. I didn't even think anything of it. I put the hot water in and I started to eat it. And as I was eating it, all of a sudden, it was the weirdest thing. My eyes started to pour with like water, and my nose was like draining. Like it was like crazy. And I was like, why is this happening? It never happened to me before. Just like literally like pouring. And I looked at my sister. I wonder if my sister still remembers. I looked at my sister like, what is with this? Oh, like what's going on? Why am I having this? Like it's just regular oatmeal. I eat oatmeal all the time. And I was like, what is this? And I maybe even said out loud, look, is there something not kosher about this? Like, what's the deal? It's like kosher oatmeal. And I take one more spoonful and I look down, and right there, right under the spoon that I took up, was an ant. was a big dead ant. And I was like, whoa. And then all of a sudden, when I threw it out, everything stopped. So that was pretty wild also.